You aren't poor because you lack money. You are poor because you cannot disappear for a single day without fearing the fallout. The crowd always misinterprets what it means to disappear. They equate it with cowardice, with abandoning responsibility, but packing a bag to escape reality isn't freedom. It is the instinctive panic of a system pushed beyond its limits. The kind of disappearance we are talking about is a ruthless privilege. It is the ability to actively revoke the world's access to your existence. You aren't hiding, you are simply stripping the crowd of their privilege to reach you. That is not weakness, it is the most primal definition of power. But all power comes with a sentence. To maintain this privilege, you must be willing to pay the price of isolation. You must entirely eradicate your need to be understood, and permanently reject the applause. If this unsettles you, then this architecture was never meant to include you. Look at the life you take so much pride in. We have become exceptionally skilled at inflating the numbers in our bank accounts. But our exhaustion scales right alongside them. It is surface-level wealth, loud, glittering, and entirely hollow. It is perfectly engineered to mask a brutal truth. You are fully subordinated to your own schedule. You wake up, react to urgent emails, manage crises you didn't create, and obediently appear exactly where you are expected. You call this submission, responsibility. You call it stability. In reality, you are merely a well-compensated captive of your own design. It isn't that you lack the money to say no, it is that the entire framework of the life you built, from gilded consumption habits to the maintenance of a fabricated social identity, has sealed every exit. Your personal system was not designed to allow you to refuse. We are not here to discuss hollow wealth building strategies or cheap financial freedom formulas. We are here to construct the invisible architecture. It is not a diversified portfolio. It is an existential defense system, a ruthless foundation built on awareness that will permanently dictate your leverage. You either earn the right to stand tall and decide exactly when you evaporate from this reality, or you remain permanently dependent on the world's permission to grant you a few days of rest. Principle 1: The sacrifice of vitality. The price tag is a flawless visual illusion. The crowd is taught to read lifeless numbers, but no one teaches them that money does not manifest from thin air. Stripped down to its absolute core, money is the materialization of your life force. It is the exact amount of living time you irreversibly exchange. This is not a metaphor. It is a literal accounting of how modern systems extract value. And most people spend their life force as if it were refundable. Look at the standard models of success society worships. Individuals with six-figure salaries, glass-walled apartments overlooking the skyline, and exorbitant vacations. They look like they are mastering the game. But strip away that income for 30 days. That entire personal empire collapses instantly. They don't own their lives. They are merely renting them from banks and corporations through ruthless employment contracts. This arrangement is normalized so thoroughly that it no longer feels coercive. A cold reality. If you live in a multimillion-dollar home, but losing your income for a single month pushes you to the brink of bankruptcy, you are not wealthy. You are just a poor person with a higher credit limit than the rest. The system rewards this illusion because it keeps participation voluntary. Every trivial purchase is not a commercial transaction. It is a ritual sacrifice. You pay for it with an irreplaceable fraction of your finite lifespan. But there is a hypocritical trap here that very few have the courage to admit. Most of the time, people do not spend recklessly because they actually enjoy it. They do it to avenge their own suffocation. They buy luxury goods and lavish dinners as an anesthetic, to escape the bitter realization that they are selling off the most brilliant years of their lives to a meaningless machine. Consumption here is not about pleasure. It is about emotional regulation. The absolute cruelty of this system lies here, even when you see through the trap. You cannot freely walk away. The problem is not a lack of awareness. The problem is that your identity has completely assimilated into that standard of living. Taking a step back, lowering your standards, or deciding to disappear equates to social erasure. You do not dare face the judging eyes or the pity of the crowd. You are bound by the very expectations and titles you constructed. The system doesn't need to handcuff you, because you have voluntarily turned your lifestyle into a closed system with no visible exits. This is not a moral failure. It is a structural one. And structures, unlike personalities, can be redesigned. That is the moment your invisible architecture fractures. You pull the bricks from your own vital core, just to construct a flashy facade for others to stare at. The tragedy is not that this trait exists. It is that it has been normalized to the point of invisibility. Poverty is not the absence of money. The poorest person is the one who furnishes their living room with their own free afternoons. People are not truly afraid of poverty. They are terrified of admitting that all the pride they wear was purchased with a lifetime of servitude. Principle 2: The silence of the non-combatant. The tragedy of adulthood is bleeding yourself dry to buy a massive house, only to work 14 hours a day so that house sits empty. Lifestyle inflation does not bankrupt your bank account. It permanently mortgages your identity. You call the endless upgrading of your living standards progress. In reality, it is simply the maintenance fee for your fear of falling behind. You aren't living in luxury. You are desperately paying installments on a fabricated identity. That isn't freedom, it is a gilded cage you lock yourself inside, just to buy a nod of approval from the crowd. This is not a personal failure. It is the predictable outcome of a system that rewards visibility over autonomy. The crowd will immediately object if you aren't striving for higher luxury. What is the motivation to live? That question exposes the limitations of a mindset fueled entirely by comparison. They require material benchmarks just to confirm they exist. But when you step outside that framework, the race to upgrade consumption becomes a meaningless loop. You don't actually crave the object. You are just desperately purchasing the feeling of not being left behind. The world only harbors two types of wealth. Type 1. Wealth engineered to be seen. Type 2. Wealth engineered to never appear at all. The first type uses assets to amplify their presence. They require labels and symbols to force the world to acknowledge their status. They are flush with cash, yet structurally dependent on attention for self-worth. The second type uses capital to purchase absolute anonymity. They have no desire to impress. Money draws a supreme boundary, allowing them to be absent from every meaningless game and permanently stripping the world of its right to appraise them. This is the silence of the non-combatant. The crux of the invisible architecture at this stage is a ruthless identity detox. It does not demand that you live in austerity or reject material goods. Its meaning is far more authoritative. You aren't buying less to save money. You are buying fewer reasons to prove who you are. The silence of the non-combatant is not a meditative state or a peaceful retreat. It is a position of asymmetric power, a place where you revoke anyone's privilege to measure you by their metrics. An autonomous identity requires no defense. Because it has been permanently pulled from the market, you don't have to react to the world, because you have stopped giving the world permission to look at you. This is not withdrawal, it is strategic non-participation. That which cannot be attacked is that which never stepped onto the battlefield. Principle 3: The power of absence. Money, in its ultimate form, is never a tool for acquisition. It is the power to exit a reality entirely, without negotiation. Most of us spend a lifetime building and maintaining our presence inside mind-numbing structures. You are terrified of being forgotten, terrified of being replaced, so you show up everywhere, react to every demand, and justify every action. You call this perpetual presence, responsibility. In truth, it is the shackle of those who will never allow you to disappear. This is not enforced by malice, but by incentives baked into the system. True autonomy is not the freedom to choose your work. It is the power of absence. But absence has its own hierarchy, and the crowd is perpetually trapped at the bottom. Tier 1 is the false absence. People believe that submitting a resignation, silencing work notifications, or backpacking to heal is freedom. But look at how they execute it. They broadcast their departure on professional networks. They write long essays explaining their journey of self-discovery. They constantly update their status to ensure the world hasn't forgotten them. They think they broke free, but they never actually disappeared. They merely traded one form of submission for another. They stopped serving a corporate hierarchy and started serving the public gaze. If you require an audience to witness your departure, you are still a hostage to attention. Attention, once required, becomes a form of dependency. Tier 2 is far more insidious, the conditional absence. This is the trap of conditional autonomy. They allow themselves to vanish, but only if they have a socially acceptable alibi. They check out due to burnout, mental health, or a personal crisis. They only dare to hit pause when the system hands them a moral permission slip. If your absence requires an explanation, if you step away but still feel compelled to apologize or prove you deserve the rest, you have never owned your own time. You are still operating within the system's terms, not your own. Absolute autonomy only exists at the summit, the absolute absence. It is ruthless, cold, and uncompromising. It is the right to completely nullify your existence from a given reality, without permission, without warning, and with zero explanation. You do not need to be understood. You do not need empathy. You do not need a single soul to agree that your decision is rational. When your invisible architecture is fully constructed, money sheds its cheap material shell. It becomes the ultimate privilege to legally disappear. You don't waste energy trying to fix toxic environments. You don't sit at the negotiating table with people operating on incompatible incentives. You simply pay the exit fee and scrub your fingerprints from the room. The highest luxury in this world is not an asset you can parade in the light. It is the sheer, disdainful right to abandon any reality the exact moment you please, without ever looking back. At this point, you are no longer an entity waiting to be appraised by the masses. You selectively withdraw from social contracts that no longer serve you, reclaiming control over your availability. This architecture was not designed to comfort those who still crave the crowd's understanding. It is an absolute dividing line. On one side, those who hold the privilege to withdraw from reality. On the other, psychological prisoners who require the gaze of others just to verify they exist. This is not a judgment of character, but a consequence of how modern social systems reward visibility over autonomy. I am not presenting this to seek your agreement. The craving for consensus is the ultimate opportunity cost of freedom. The moment you need the crowd to nod at how you live, you implicitly hand them the gavel to dictate your worth, not because people are malicious, but because collective approval always demands conformity. Explaining, justifying, and hoping for validation only proves one thing: you are still begging the world to grant you a place. This is a pattern most people inherit unconsciously, not a personal failure. True freedom is not born from convincing the masses that you are right. It begins the moment you consciously revoke the world's voting rights over your life. If you see the absolute cruelty of this system, yet continue to bleed yourself dry just to maintain a glittering shell for the crowd, you have never owned a single thing in your life. Pause. Face one final question. Do not attempt to mask it with hollow moral justifications. Let it freeze every illusion you have left. If you stepped away tomorrow, without explanation or performance, without a single justification, who in your life would actually lose control? What exactly is anchoring you to this reality? Is it the burden you so proudly call responsibility? Or is it sheer, paralyzing terror, the dread of facing absolute silence, where there is no one left to applaud your sacrifice? This is not a moral indictment. It is a structural outcome of modern systems that reward visibility over sovereignty. Those who cannot construct their own invisible architecture often end up spending their lives as waiters in someone else's empire. I am Julian, and this is PageCondensed.